Okay, so hello, I'm Charlie Stripp and I'm the president of the Mathematical Association for this year. And as part of my presidency, I'm doing some video interviews with various prominent people in maths education. And during my presidency, I'm thinking about three big themes, or three big challenges, I suppose, that maths education faces. One of them is around attitudes to maths and maths education. One is around chronic shortage of secondary maths teachers. And the other one is about use of technology in teaching and learning maths. Now today, the person I've got with me is Jane Hawkins. And so Jane is an assistant director at the NCETM. She's a member of the secondary team, but she's a very experienced classroom teacher. And she's also been the director of maths for a trust. She also went to Shanghai as part of the Shanghai exchanges with the NCETM back in 2019. But she's been working at the NCETM for a few years now, and she's a member of the secondary team, and she's particularly keen on things to do with, I suppose, disadvantaged young people in education and how to help them to achieve their potential, and also around the whole idea of how oracy can help with teaching and learning, and wanting to really understand that in the context of maths education. So I think really in terms of the themes that I'm talking about, it's really the attitudes to maths and maths education, I think, which is the one where Jane's work has the big impact. And I think that we know that people who struggle with maths often develop negative attitudes towards it, and that can then become self-reinforcing. And I think that trying to make sure that young people don't get themselves into a position where they are feeling that they're falling behind in maths, where they're feeling that they don't understand what's going on, because maths is quite brutal like that, and we've got to make sure that we build firm foundations and develop those continuously. Then Jane's work, I think, is really focused on how we can help to make that happen for all young people. And the first thing that I've asked us to talk about is actually an NCTM program that's operating this year for the first time. And it's around securing foundations in year 7 mathematics, or securing foundations for year 7. And the issue is that there are now more young people than ever before, the long tail of underachievement in the Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 transition. And it's really, the issue is that those young people, they are not necessarily ready to start the Key Stage 3 curriculum at the time that they start Key Stage 3. And if that isn't addressed, then that can be a real disaster for the young people concerned. So, Jane, I would invite you to start with to talk about securing foundations and that programme, and explain how that works. And well, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to chat this through with you this morning, Charlie. I'm really excited that securing foundations at year 7 has even been allowed to be a project for the NCETM, because I think there's a real risk that we are sort of sending pupils off into Key Stage 3 and expecting them to keep up with the Key Stage 3 curriculum content. And for a big proportion of pupils, that's just not the case. So, about 30%, of pupils don't meet age-related expectations by the end of Key Stage 2. And that's disadvantaged learners, pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds, are doubly represented. They're overrepresented in that group. So it is about low priority pupils. And especially for us, our attention is on the pupils who are from disadvantaged backgrounds, who are twice as represented in that group of low priority pupils. So we're trying to design a program that has Key Stage, well, I was going to say Key Stage 2, but there is actually also some Key Stage 1 content, maths content, but tailored and adapted to be suitable for a Key Stage 3 audience. Because obviously, the primary materials are out there. There are lots of primary resources that are really, really good, but they're not necessarily context specific or appropriate for Key Stage 3 pupils, and we want their learning to be really coherent and connected in a context that feels appropriate for them. So we've designed securing foundations at year 7 around some sort of specific principles, I suppose, which draw on the essence of mathematics teaching for mastery. This is very much got mastery at its heart. For example, fundamentally, we think that all students, regardless of prior attainment, can learn and enjoy maths. That's what we're going for. But equally, that this group of students need a really firm, really secure understanding that's flexible, because we want them to be able to apply the maths they know in different contexts and see maths as a connected whole rather than a series of disparate parts. So for example, in the early part, we're working on part whole, which is very much Key Stage 1 content. But then students, once they get to grips with part whole, also being able to apply that in the context of data. You know, if we're doing a survey and some people have walked to school, the difference is visible on a bar chart, but the maths is underpinned by the same structure as that part whole relationship. So supporting pupils to make connections in their learning. And if they can partition 5, then they can absolutely partition 5x the same. So, you know, we're trying to tailor the materials to make sure they're suitable for Key Stage 3 students, and including some Key Stage 3 content as well. Sorry, go on.
Okay, so this is a program to work with teachers in secondary schools in Key Stage 3 to help those young people that haven't got these secure foundations when they start Key Stage 3. One of the things that I know people will be interested in is how can that work in the overall kind of school maths provision? How do you manage to enable those pupils who need this extra help to have that help without falling further behind, which is often an issue, isn't it, with maths, that you think I'd like to be able to fill those gaps, but on the other hand, I've got to get on with the curriculum. So how does Securing Foundations address that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so Key Stage 3 teachers, I think, have been doing this for a long time, dipping back into Key Stage 2 content as the sort of prerequisite knowledge, the prior understanding that pupils need for Key Stage 3. But increasingly, we're hearing reports from our teachers that they're having to go further and further back in the curriculum content from what pupils don't understand. You know, we had 18 months, a couple of years, where pupils weren't accessing school in the normal way. Yeah. And so for the group of pupils that are coming through to Key Stage 3 now, that's getting further back in their education, where they missed sort of chunks of time having classroom-based lessons, classroom-based learning about maths.
Yeah, I know actually the data do show, don't they, that COVID seems to have lengthened the tail of underachievement in Key Stage 2 SATs. And it's really that so this situation, and we think COVID is a you know perhaps a driving feature of what's happened. That situation has got worse in recent years.
Yeah, and again, the indicators are probably reasonably early at this stage, but the indicators seem to say that it was pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds who were worse affected by school closures. So again, that's the target group of pupils we want to support to better understand maths through Securing Foundations at Year 7 is those low prior attaining pupils, which are disproportionately represented and increasingly so represented by disadvantaged students.
Okay, so then with Securing Foundations, then what is it the teachers are doing in the classroom, and how they integrating that into the curriculum?
Yeah, teachers are actually, it's really interesting doing it in a variety of ways. So in some schools, in some settings, there's a small intervention group who are having Securing Foundations sort of type lessons in a way that's in addition to their normal maths lessons. And in some schools, Securing Foundations is becoming more, you know, a more substantial part of their normal curriculum. And I think what we're advocating for through Securing Foundations is the content from earlier in the curriculum, so that teachers get to grips with that knowledge and that understanding. If you've never taught someone to partition 5, that's really complex actually, and we need teachers to understand that. But also things about, so one of our other principles is that all pupils should have equitable access to reasoning and problem solving as a routine part of their curriculum experience. So we want lessons to be deep in maths content and rich in their sort of maths experience. This attends to what you're saying about pupils' experience and attitudes towards maths. You know, we want these pupils to feel like they are good at maths. So if the content perhaps has to be building on what they previously understand, you know, in my opinion, there's not very much point in sort of offering them content from Key Stage 3 if actually that's really inaccessible to them. We need to make the content appropriate so it authentically builds on what they previously have understood, what they really deeply and connectedly understand, and build on from that so that their learning becomes secure and connected. And then we can do the things about reasoning and problem solving, and that other part of maths, which is about being logical and forming chains of reasoning and answering problems and solving really complex problems, but where the content is perhaps from slightly earlier in the curriculum. So we're supporting teachers to develop the pedagogy around having really interactive maths lessons and maths lessons where the pupils are thinking deeply and building on previous learning, rather than just sort of being in a classroom where Key Stage 3 content is covered. I'm really wary about covering content if actually it's not the most appropriate thing for that group of students.
Yeah, well, I know that there's evidence of Ofsted around this, isn't there? And things they've said about it, like that some people would be better served by studying less but securing their learning more, and actually that equips them to be able to make progress. So
yeah, absolutely.
And again, it's consistent with the whole teaching mastery idea, isn't it? That you, if you want to make progress, you need to understand the fundamental things that move on to the next stage in your mathematical learning, and you can't kind of, if you haven't got that, you can't kind of pretend that's not a problem. You've got to deal with it. And I think what Securing Foundation is doing is acknowledging it's got to be dealt with and trying to help teachers to do that.
Yeah, and another one of, so I think that quote's from the most recent Ofsted subject report, coordinating mathematical success.
Yeah.
And there's another line in there that's something around pupils moving on when they're not mathematically ready gives the illusion of progress, but actually creates ever greater gaps that will take more time to address in the future. And that's that's securing foundations.
And actually, that goes back to my initial point about attitudes to maths, doesn't it? If you feel that you just don't understand what's going on, then that's when those negative attitudes develop. And if you can avoid that happening by getting the teaching right at the right time, and if there are deficits, trying to address those deficits, then you can help to avoid that kind of that anxiety and fear that can come out of maths education sometimes. So fixing what you're trying to achieve at the start of Key Stage 3 can really, well, as I say, securing foundations for future mathematical learning.
And pupils don't come up from Key Stage 2, even those pupils who are quite significantly, below the expected standard at Key Stage 2, they don't come up with no knowledge, right? They have learned some things in primary school, but they're just maybe not connected, or they've missed one or two fundamental things, which mean actually the other bits are a bit wobbly. And so we're wanting to address those gaps in knowledge, or those wobbly bricks, if you like, so that they can absolutely make those connections and then make better progress later. It's not about kind of them sticking now at Key Stage 1 curriculum content. We want them to deeply and securely understand this so they can build on it authentically for Key Stage 2 content and then Key Stage 3 content, so that when they get to Key Stage 4, they're really ready to access that content in an appropriate way. I
know that the program's running for the first time this year. So obviously you're working with a number of schools, in fact a few hundred schools. I wondered if you could give some indication of how it's being received by teachers and whether there's evidence of the impact that it's having.
So it's been absolutely fascinating to talk to teachers and see how they're sort of what this looks like in their classrooms, because the way that we've designed it, the materials and the professional development that's going around it, it's got our set of intentions behind it, but then how teachers are actually sort of translating that to classroom practice has been fascinating. Teachers are kind of reporting that actually the content that we're covering with the materials wasn't ever part of their teaching practice, or their teaching where they learned about teaching and pedagogy, because often Key Stage secondary school maths teachers have got much got a mathsy background, probably have studied maths to A level, probably understand maths quite well themselves, and actually Key Stage 1 wasn't necessarily part of the content they covered in their initial teacher training. So sort of hearing about that is really interesting. Teachers kind of saying, we knew we needed something, but we didn't know we needed this. We didn't know we needed to go this far back. As I said, teachers are experiencing sort of attending to Key Stage 2 content, but actually some of the gaps that we're experiencing now in pupils is from Key Stage 1, and that's new for teachers. Like, this is exactly, so a teacher said, this is exactly what we needed. We've been waiting for this. This is exactly what we needed for this particular group of pupils. And the pupils' attitudes are starting to change. We're hearing reports of pupils' attitudes towards maths changing. They're now enjoying coming to maths lessons more. And actually, one of the teachers told us that they are using it as an intervention, but they're seeing the impact of that intervention in their normal maths lessons.
Yep.
And those pupils are behaving differently in their normal maths lessons now than they were, because they have been empowered. They feel more confident to share their thinking. They feel they feel differently about coming to maths lessons as a result of the work they've been doing on securing foundations in their intervention classes. And that's just hugely powerful, I think.
It's really encouraging, isn't it? And I think that in my career, I'm very experienced at teaching GCSE research students, for example. And often those students that are researching GCSE, their whole secondary maths experience has been very negative because they lack that fundamental basic things that they missed out on. That is for whatever reason when early in their school career, and because the things that they missed were never properly addressed, then everything just got more and more bewildering, and they became more and more negative about maths. And actually, by the time young people are 16, 17, it's quite hard for them to recover from that. So I think that having something that's saying, okay, at the key stage 2 or 3 transition, if there are issues there, can we deal with that then? That's got to be a really important thing. So no, it's really encouraging.
Yeah, so our kind of fourth principle for securing foundations is that students develop mathematical learning behaviours that enable them to engage as learners who reason and seek to make connections. We want these pupils to behave like mathematicians when they're in maths lessons, feel like they can engage with the maths, participate fully, and be valued, and get some of that sense of joy of maths that I think is so attainable for pupils if they're being offered a curriculum that meets their needs.
Yeah, and actually they are learning maths and learning how maths works, learning how to use and enjoy maths, not on the basis of can I pick up some marks on an exam by knowing this fact, but by being able to understand what they're doing, and hopefully that can lead to a much better mathematical life for them, actually, which is a really encouraging thing. Okay, so that's securing foundations. The other big thing that you're involved in your work is around oracy in maths, and actually the two things are linked a bit, aren't they? But I mean, my own views on oracy, I think when I was teaching, I like talking, but that's probably why I'm doing this. I like talking to people, and I always wanted to talk to the people I was teaching about the maths, and try to sort of ask them the right questions and get them thinking about it and discussing it, and also have them talk to each other. But I recognised when I was teaching that was actually quite unusual. That it was not a standard thing to encourage children to talk in maths classes. Another thing I found when I first started teaching is that I have a maths degree. I love maths. I really like it. I realised when I started teaching maths, actually at all levels I taught it, from year 7 right up to A level further maths, I realised that there was maths that I thought I understood and didn't realise I didn't understand it properly until I tried to teach it. And then when I tried to teach it, I had to articulate understanding and try to impart that understanding to others. And that actually greatly, I think, increased my own understanding of mathematics. And so I think, just from a personal point of view, I can see how oracy, the need to explain and articulate your thinking, can really help you to think more deeply and make stronger connections and understand things better. So I'm really interested in how oracy can work in maths. I know oracy is a buzz thing at the moment, but what I want to understand is how oracy works in the context of mathematics teaching and learning, not a general kind of oracy is a good thing. I want to understand it better than that to support the work we're doing to improve maths education.
Yeah, so you're right. Oracy is currently a bit of a buzz topic, and actually over the course of sort of the last 70 years or so, oracy has come in and out of fashion a bit. There's been waves of talk for maths and things like that, programs which have been thinking about focusing on talk in maths lessons.
Yep.
But I suppose one thing that I think never changes is that we are going to talk in maths lessons. There is talk, and so I'm really interested in the way that we, I don't know, sort of make the most of that talk, I suppose. If we're going to be talking in maths lessons, let's really make the most of it. The NCETM's sort of position on oracy is that it involves authentic listening, articulation and development of mathematical thinking, and that it's an essential skill that supports learning by drawing attention to mathematical structure and enabling pupils to make connections. You know, the 5 big ideas of teaching for mastery have making connections in each one. And I think for me, that's a big part of what disciplinary oracy in maths looks like, feels like. So I use the term disciplinary oracy there. That's my understanding of that is, you know, this isn't about having an extra oracy hour on the curriculum somewhere. We're not trying to find another, you know, a 6th period in the day for oracy. Disciplinary oracy is about the oracy of maths, in maths, using to talk like a mathematician, articulate mathematical thinking, talking in the discipline of maths, and equally, you know, in the discipline of geography and in the discipline of music. But for us, it's really interesting to think about the disciplinary oracy in maths and what that looks like for students.
Yeah, I know that we're talking about using precise mathematical language and things. We've talked about that for a long time, haven't we? But it's actually oracy in teaching and learning is more than that, isn't it? It is actually about being able to explain your ideas or challenge another person's ideas in a clear way, and actually I suppose also there's the idea that if you're discussing something and trying and grappling with it, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to but through the dialogue that you have, you develop understanding, and getting that kind of culture as well, I think, is really important in the classroom. It's something that I know my own teaching, I was always very, very keen to do that. That sometimes if you feel that some students haven't understood something properly, sometimes the most effective way to, I suppose, reveal that misunderstanding and help to overcome it is by students talking to each other and explaining things to each other.
Yeah, there's lots about the different types of talk. You know, there's teacher to pupil talk, there's pupil to pupil talk. There's sort of you might think about it as a sort of a volleyball around, you know, whole class discussions. There's lots of different ways we can think about talk. And sort of Neil Mercer talks about different types of talk as well. We've, you know, pupil to pupil talk in itself can have different types. It might be disputational or cumulative, and actually perhaps what we want it to be is tending towards exploratory, where there's that really authentic sort of exchange of thinking and exactly as you say, maybe being wrong or maybe offering an idea or a way of thinking about maths that is challenged by another student. We don't want that to always have to come back to the teacher. We want pupils to be able to engage authentically with each other. And sort of the We Need to Talk report from the Oracy Education Commission talks a lot about disciplinary oracy, actually, but actually it talks about kind of the pupils that are going to be living in our society, or that are living in our society and will be adults in, you know, 5 years, 10 years. We need them to have ways, be equipped with the skills that enable them to reason and argue in a polite and rational way, so that we can have a discourse, so we can have proper discourse in society. And that's the sort of bigger picture around oracy. I suppose one of the things that we might want to think about in a maths classroom, what that looks like for our pupils.
Yeah, so actually what you're doing is a bit of research in a sense, isn't it, to try to actually understand how oracy in maths works, and maybe we can contribute to knowledge around that. I know that when I first went to Shanghai, I was surprised by many things in Shanghai. One of the things I was surprised by was how much dialogue goes on in the classroom. And I really wasn't expecting that at all. But that kind of you talked about volleyball, didn't you, just now, about the idea that there's an exchange of ideas going on, and ideas being reinforced and misconceptions being addressed through dialogue.
Yeah, so actually one of the, I don't know, not criticisms exactly, but one of the challenges around oracy sometimes for teachers and schools' perception of dialogue-rich classrooms is that there's nothing concrete, there's nothing written down as a result of this conversation, because we're exchanging these ideas. But actually, particularly, I think it applies to misconceptions. If misconceptions are, you know, pupils have a misconception which is then written down in their book, and then the teachers mark the books a couple of weeks later, then that the time for addressing that misconception might well have passed. Whereas if the misconceptions are aired orally and the teacher is listening to the pupils, then those misconceptions can be addressed really promptly. You know, the feedback in a dialogue rich classroom is instant. And I think that's one of the reasons that makes oracy rich maths classrooms successful, is because that instantaneous sort of exchange and corrections can happen, you know, in the moment as those pupils are forming their ideas of maths. That's really powerful.
Yeah, I think another thing I feel about it, one of the things that I thought, again, using myself as an example of thinking about explaining maths, is that sometimes you know, the way you learn is by thinking about things, isn't it? And if you think about something in a way that means that you can articulate it to somebody else, you're engaging really deeply with your thinking when you're thinking about a piece of mathematics. And I think that's something that can really be stimulating in a classroom. And also, I mean, something I've said many times is that what you're interested in is a product of a lesson. It isn't what's written in a child's book; it's what's happening inside their head. And if you've been able to actually stimulate their thinking, make them think harder about something, realize a misconception or understand something more deeply, then I can see how oracy and dialogue can really contribute positively to that.
I was really privileged to see a lesson where a pupil put their hand up and offered an answer which was correct answer, and then gave their explanation as to why that was the correct, why that was the case. And then another pupil contributed without the teacher being part of the dialogue, particularly, even though this was to a whole silent classroom. Another pupil said that is the right answer, but that's not why. And hearing those two pupils being able to articulate their thinking, but also grapple with the thinking of somebody else, and be able to kind of share their thinking in response to that, was really just such a delight. And I think for me was, you know, what we would want from a dialogue rich classroom, where those pupils were empowered to share their thinking and exchange ideas and adapt their thinking on the basis of other people's contributions as well.
Something I saw in Shanghai which really impressed me, and I hadn't really thought about it in a so deeply before, is that a standard piece of dialogue in a Shanghai classroom it might be what's the answer to the question, but then it might also be, so say a pupil gives an answer, the teacher might then ask another pupil, you know, how did that pupil get that answer, and then might ask another pupil, well, why did that work? And that's really engaging at different levels, isn't it? In the same question is being engaged with at different levels, and it also really helps with generalization as well. Thinking about that, I mean, I think, you know, it is a really powerful tool in the classroom. And if you can have teachers can do that in engaging with the class, but children can also do it engaging with each other, and I think it's a hugely powerful thing.
Yeah, one of the things I would say to people, for teachers, if they're just starting to think about increasing the quality of the dialogue in their classroom, I would just say, you know, for any response you get, ask how the pupil knows. How do you know? Why does that work? What, those kind of questions, that follow-up question, so that the answer is sort of just the beginning of the conversation around the maths that's going on. And exactly as you say, kind of that can then tend to us being able to head towards a generalization.
Yeah, and there's been thinking around this for a long time, hasn't it? I can remember even when I was trained to be a teacher, I think there were people talking about convince a friend, convince an enemy, but those kind of things. Can you explain something so clearly that even somebody who's adamant that they're right and you think they're wrong, can you convince them? And that's it's very powerful, I think. And so the idea that we are going to try to find out more about effective practice in using oracy in the maths classroom, I think is hugely important. And again, perhaps it also can change people's views around mathematics, because I suppose a stereotypical view of maths is it's something that people kind of do in isolation, and that there's not much interaction going on in maths, and actually it could and should be the opposite of that.
Yeah, the Speak for Change inquiry reported that actually maths teachers are one of the lowest proportion of teachers who think talking is important in their subject. You know, English teachers always think talking in English is really important. Math teachers to a far less extent. And I think what we're seeking to understand better is the ways in which talking in maths has a positive impact on pupils and pupils' outcomes, and also teachers, there's huge benefits for the teacher if teachers can shift their attention from listening for a correct answer, listening for they know the answer and they're waiting for that to come up. I was with a group of teachers yesterday, last week actually, who were talking about this specific thing. I think it's really powerful when teachers can shift from listening for to listening to. If you can listen to what the pupils are saying, what they understand, then the assessment for learning opportunities for us as teachers is just huge. Knowing what pupils do understand and then being able to build on that, those things we were talking about earlier about a coherent and connected curriculum. Well, we need to know what pupils do understand. And then the 5 practices for orchestrating mathematical discussion, that anticipating, and then that selecting and sequencing, all of those things are much easier if the teacher has listened first to what the pupils understand.
Yeah, so I suppose one of the things that we're talking very enthusiastically because both you and I are very keen on this idea, but something also would be nice to have is some can we get evidence of the effectiveness of oracy as part of maths teaching, and so there's lots of dimensions to this, but I think that I think I'm very pleased that oracy has become something that's a lot of attention is being paid to. And I think that maybe people might not generally think that as maths educators we'd be especially interested in it, but I think that we really are, and I think there is lots of important work to be done there, and that idea of talking about maths and dialogue and talking about thinking and understanding, that again is something I think can improve attitudes to maths amongst those people who don't have a positive attitude towards it. So I know something you said to me earlier was about teachers sometimes not wanting to ask some pupils, I'll be nice and I won't ask because I know that pupil doesn't like maths very much. And what do you think about that? Because I know that happens, and I know I've done it myself.
Yeah, so it's really hard, isn't it? And I think one of the things, one of the reasons I enjoy teaching and teacher professionalism so much is that it's so complex and so nuanced. So I guess similar, drawing on what we were saying earlier about the illusion of progress, perhaps. I wonder whether this is, an instance of the illusion of kindness and not asking that pupil to speak and share their thinking actually does them a greater disservice in the long run in terms of their perceptions of themselves and the value of their contributions in maths. We want all pupils to feel valued and to feel like active citizens, in the first instance in a maths classrooms, but then, later on more broadly as in their place as citizens more widely. And so I think, it's just so complex and nuanced. I wouldn't expect every pupil to say something every time, but I would over a course of lessons, or our work together over the course of a year, for those pupils to be gently supported to share their thinking. And I think maybe it comes down to what we as teachers give off our impression of, or what they as pupils perceive maths to be, right? If you perceive maths to be a really high risk subject where you're either right or wrong, then I think speaking becomes, there's lots of more frightening, perhaps lots of anxiety there if it's a really high risk subject. Whereas if we can support pupils to understand and continue to develop our own thinking as teachers about what maths is, actually it's about sharing thinking and paying attention and noticing and solving problems and thinking sort of broadly, I suppose, then pupils' contributions become easier because if the thinking is valued, then that's what they see.
Yeah, so perhaps you can change classroom culture a bit by talking more, and then people are less worried about putting forward their ideas. And again, I've got another anecdote I have from being in Shanghai. This was in I think a very early secondary classroom, so probably like the equivalent of our year 7. But what the teacher was doing was trying to question understanding about a particular thing and asking a slightly different question that related to what was already being discussed. And people put a hand up and said, I think the answer is this. And the teacher just said, no, that's wrong. And I think and the pupil was completely unfazed by that. He said, "Don't worry, you know." Well, I mean, this is my translation of what the list was in Chinese, and I had to translate it with you. But I said the teacher said that's wrong. I'm not going to tell you why it's wrong. We'll just carry on. But the idea, the thing that really struck me was that I know I've witnessed this and probably done it myself. If you tell people they're wrong, that can really really damage their confidence and make them think, oh God, that's awful. And also the other children will turn around and say, "Hi, you know, you got that wrong," that kind of thing. But that in that classroom, that was just the people themselves was completely unfazed by the idea they'd been told they were wrong, and it was just part of the dialogue that was going on. The fact they were wrong was just another piece of information that went into the discussion. But that's a different classroom culture to many classroom cultures that we see here, and certainly many classroom cultures that I've observed myself, I suspect.
Yeah, when we are working with teachers on developing oracy rich practices in their classroom, it often comes back to culture. What do you and the children understand maths to be? Because a shared understanding of that between teacher and pupil, I think, massively impacts the culture, and therefore what is possible in those maths classrooms where teachers and pupils have a shared understanding of maths, and oracy is one of the ways that we can sort of get to that with teachers. There's been lots and lots of fascinating conversations I've had with teachers over the last few years working on oracy, and culture always continues to be a theme. Yeah. Culture in the classroom.
Okay, so we talked about securing foundations, and we talked about oracy. Are there? I mean, I know both of us are very concerned about young people from disadvantaged backgrounds often underachieving in maths. Is there anything more you'd like to say about that, Jane, while I've got you?
Yeah, so part of my interest in oracy actually is because it seems to be one of the ways that makes a difference to the disadvantage attainment gap, right? So the disadvantage attainment gap, different figures are reported, but generally we think of it about 18 months on pupils' entry to primary school, and the average end of leaving Key Stage 4 is something like 3 years. So we start off with a disadvantage attainment gap when pupils come to school, and by the time they leave, it's worse, and that means something is going wrong somewhere. And I think there's what's the name of the thing that's been released recently? The Maths Excellence Pathways. Yeah. I know that's focusing on Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 particularly, yeah. but that draws our attention to the fact that pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds are underrepresented in pupils who go on to study maths later on. And we've talked earlier about pupils being overrepresented, disadvantaged pupils being overrepresented in that low prior attaining group when they start at Key Stage 2. The Maths Excellence Pathways, actually, there's a quote somewhere in it that says something like students from more deprived areas were well underrepresented in the top grades in maths throughout school. So this is a problem that we need to address from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 4. And the EEF released a meta-analysis, I think, of some studies into oral language intervention. Yeah. And that showed that oracy makes a difference to all pupils. Pupils who had experienced oral language interventions made on average about 4 months additional progress, I think. But for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, that went up to something like 6 months additional progress. So oracy seems to be like it might be one of the strategies that helps all pupils learn better, but actually helps disadvantaged pupils disproportionately better. That they were oral language interventions, and the work we're doing on disciplinary oracy and maths isn't about oral language interventions. It's about pedagogy and classroom culture. It's a whole classroom thing. But oracy attending to disadvantage seems to be one of the strategies that might make a difference. And the TIMS data that came out at the end of was it the end of last year or the very beginning of this year?
It was the end of last year.
Yeah. Again, that seems like England's doing quite well, and we're on a rising tide for maths generally. The work of the NCETM and the maths subs, I hope, is contributing to some of that positive change in maths outcomes for pupils. But we've still got the disadvantage attainment gap that's really difficult, seems really difficult to nudge.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I mean, if you look at the Sims data, the spread of data, spread of attainments for our pupils is very wide relative to other countries, and that shows that we do have this issue that we need to try to address. Even though, as you say, overall we're doing pretty well. And
Yeah.
yeah, from what you've just been saying about, I mean, you're right to point out that the oracy, it seems to be, but it seems to help all pupils in the research that there is around it in this more general sense. But what we need to understand, and help all pupils and help disadvantaged pupils even more. But what we need to understand, hopefully we'll do that through the work that we're doing, is we need to understand how we can make that work in maths and have the maximum impact in maths, both for every pupil, but also hopefully we can show how that can help to close the disadvantage gap in maths as well.
Yeah, we're talking about kind of equity, I think, equity of access, and for me, that means doing something distinct and different for pupils from under-resourced backgrounds to enable them to overcome the additional barriers they face in the current system. Equality is everybody having access to the same, yep. And equity is that thing about distinct and difference. And circling right back to Securing Foundations, I think that's part of where Securing Foundations has come from. This is something different. This isn't a standard Year 7 curriculum, that's been slightly adapted to hopefully better meet the needs. This is something really distinct and really different, which seeks to address the particular gaps of this particular group of pupils, which are overrepresented by disadvantaged learners.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see, isn't it, over time, what impact it has. I mean, at the moment we're very enthusiastic about it, and obviously the huge amount of work and commitment is going into it, and the early signs from teachers that are involved in it are very positive. But we've still got to wait and see what the bottom line is ultimately. But it seems like we're trying to do the right things, and we're trying to use research evidence to inform what we're doing.
Yeah, we've got some very, very early data. It's only from the first sort of half term's worth of work, but the tail is reducing. We've got the box plot,
okay.
As you can imagine, for the baseline data, yeah. and then a box plot for the end of Dec 2 work, and the tail is reducing, and the interquartile range, the nice middly bit, has shifted up a bit, and that's really, really positive. Obviously very early, very tentative, but
so tell me, I didn't ask you this at the start, but I know it's a large number of schools. How many schools is it you're working with in the Securing Foundations program?
It's about 440.
Yeah, so that's it's a very large number of schools, and obviously that's a good test of how practical it is to implement and a good test of what impact it might have, because I'm quite another thing I know happens is that you have little tiny studies with just 1 or 2 schools and everything looks marvelous, but when you try to implement something at scale, the real world kicks in a little bit, doesn't it? And it's much less easy. But the fact that we're doing this with a lot of schools is it's a very, very bold thing to do, but it's it seems to be working well so far. So yeah, very important work, I think.
I think for me, as much as anything, oracy and Securing Foundations and attending to disadvantage, it's just, well, like, I'm so thrilled that this is one of your vlogs this year as president, because we just need to keep on attending to this. This isn't something we're going to fix with 1 or 2 silver bullets. This is an ongoing piece of work, and we need to maintain our focus on this if we're serious about closing the disadvantaged attainment gap and maximizing all pupils' potential.
Yeah, and as someone who's taught many GCSE research students over the years, I mean, I feel this is something that can really prevent that from happening. Might make it so that far fewer young people reach the end of Year 11 and aren't able to get their meet national expectations, get a grade 4 or above in GCSE maths. I think that it's not to do with the potential of those young people. It's to do with how we've got their education experience a bit wrong. And I think that we're trying to address that here, and I'm really hopeful that what we're doing can really make a big difference.
That's the plan, Charlie. Maybe we should talk again in 5 years and see.
Yes, yeah, but perhaps we should. Anyway, Jane, really lovely to talk to you. I mean, your enthusiasm definitely shines through all of this, and what we're talking about, Securing Foundations, those problems are really hard things to try to address. And we're having a go at doing something about it, and working with real schools in a whole variety of circumstances to try to do that, and the oracy stuff as well. So it is a buzzword at the moment. It is a kind of trendy thing, but thinking about how we can deal with oracy in maths, and knowing how I think that can improve mathematical learning and improve attitudes to maths as well, if we can incorporate oracy much more into the teaching and learning of mathematics. So great. Okay. Thanks very much, Jane. Lovely to speak to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Thank you.